Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at our 7.23 support tier list. So if you haven't watched it yet, I have already released my patch notes, meta-analysis, and top 5 for each role video. That's all in one. It's about an hour long, and it's already going to be up on the channel by the time this comes out. So be sure to check that out for some background info. A lot of that information is going to influence where I put champions in the tier list, because ultimately, to understand why a support is good, it's not just the runes, it's not just the items, it's not just the matchup bot lane. All those figure in, but it's also how does the champion fit into the overall meta, right? How does it match up with other popular picks in top lane or other popular picks in jungle, for example. So be sure to watch that video for some more sort of context on why I am going to rate certain champions the way that I rate them. And if you want to find this Google Doc, you can find it in the description. I'll also have timestamps so you can jump around to your favorite champion. And just keep in mind also, every time I do a tier list, as I'm sure anyone on YouTube who does a tier list about anything can attest to, this is just my insights, right? These are just my insights, rather. So your favorite champion may not be as high as you think it should be. This is just where I would rank the champions, and this is intended for a broader audience across a wide spectrum of elos, right? Like some of these champions will be much better in bronze and silver. Some of these champions will be much better in professional play. So I'm just aiming for a broader audience. And there's always people who can one-trick champions too. You know, people will say, but Sion, you've got Tiltarella out there. He's challenger. You know, Sion player, surely Sion's #1. It's like, well, not really. Not for the general population. Okay, so you can do much better on these champions. And if you do, go play it. You know, if you really love to one-trick Zillion, for example, as support, then, you know, go do it. Go play a lot of Zillion, right? I'm talking about a general population. So as an individual, you know, you can perform much better on these champions than where I have them on the tier list. But for the general population, I think it's a pretty good list. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. I'm not going to recap the whole thing from last video, but the important things to note from the meta-analysis are that Aerie got weaker. Aftershock is thus going to be the strongest support keystone by far. Now, it was already super strong, but now that Aerie has been nerfed and you can't harass the Aftershock champions as much in lane, then they're just going to have a free pass. They're going to be super strong right now. Games are still going to be very fast, so there's going to be a lot of assassins and other roles, which in general lack CC. Not always, but often. There has been a lack of CC, and there's been a lot of squishy champions in the meta running around. And that means that support as tanks are very valuable, because tanks aren't going to be squishy, and usually they come with a lot of CC. So people were wondering, well, when are tanks going to come back? I knew they'd be better last patch, but I didn't quite anticipate just how good they would be. I think they were still on par with AP champions like Zyra and some utility champions like Sona, but by and large, they were a little bit stronger than I thought. And now they're going to be even stronger now. Aftershock is that powerful. So this is what has brought tanks back. People were wondering, well, what would it take to bring tanks back? Well, massive nerfs to the utility class. Excuse me. Ardent Censor's been nerfed. They took out Windspeaker's Blessing. And it doesn't have a very good replacement. So that's another nerf. And then Redemption was nerfed near the end of last season. And specifically, Janna was nerfed a lot. And Sona has been hot patch nerfed on this patch as well. And then they gave the tanks a super powerful keystone. So and the meta has just shifted and sped up to where assassins are, and just really high damage champions in general are super powerful right now. And all of those things are very good against enchanters. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter how much you scale as an enchanter at 3 items if you just get murdered and go 0-6, you know, in the first 15 minutes a lot of times. So yeah, enchanters are still good. You know, Sona's still great if she gets, you know, Ardent, Athene's Unholy Grail, Redemption. It's just a lot harder to get to that now because games are ending much faster. I think Riot released something where they're like, oh, games are only ending about 30 seconds faster. Maybe, and like with the aggregate data, maybe that's true. I don't know. But I'll tell you right now, it feels like it's a lot faster to me and to a lot of other analysts out there. I mean, it feels like games are at least 5 minutes faster to me. So it feels like a lot of games are determined between the 25 and 30-minute mark rather than 30 to 35. There are still some longer games, but it's definitely getting a bit faster, and that means that you're going to have less items. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this. I also have, for each champion of the top 20, so I updated to the top 20 this time, a little mini guide. So if you just click on the link below the champion, you can see my recommended runes and items for each one of those. And if I have an in-depth guide, I'll have a link to that as well. I have several in-depth guides for Season 7, and I'm going to be adding more for Season 8. Leona is probably top of the list. I get asked about her all the time. And I'm going to have that added very soon. Okay. So Tier 1. All right, Leona. Now, if you've been a fan of the channel for a while, you'll know that I have not historically been a fan of Leona. I know, I mean, she's really cool. Like, I'm a fan theory-wise. You know, I like her lore. I think she's great. I think she's fun. I think she has some cool skins. I like her beach skin with the little, you know, the umbrella sword or whatever she's got. She's cool in that respect. But in terms of champion select, I've never been a big fan because I think that historically she has been outclassed by Thresh, Alistar, Blitzcrank, just all of these other engaged champions, even Nautilus for a lot of Season 6. But I think it is her time to shine. So what specifically about Leona has made her someone that I was kind of hesitant to recommend into someone that I think is Tier 1 right now, that I do recommend? Well, it all has to do with Aftershock. So if you look at Aftershock, and I'm going to talk about this rune a lot, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull it up here, if you're not familiar with this, or why it's good. Okay, so first of all, it gives you a flat 20 armor and 20 magic resist, if you just think about the value. So 20 armor is worth 400 gold, 20 magic resist worth 360. So it gives you 760 gold worth of tanky stats right off the bat for 2.5 seconds. So that right there is powerful enough. But it also gives you an extra 30% armor. That's not bonus armor, it total armor. So whatever your total armor is, it gives you 30%. So if you have 100 total armor, including your base armor, it's going to give you an extra 30. So 30, 30 would give you a total of 50 of each one of these. Right? And so that's 760 times 2. That's 520 gold worth of stats on this for 2.5 seconds. And then it has a pretty significant damage component to it as well. That's area of effect. Okay, so it gives you like usually somewhere around 1,500 gold in stats. And keep in mind, this is not on a bi-level basis. You get this like level 1, the 2020 plus whatever else bonus. So that's pretty massive. So even if it only gives you, like, if you have 50 base armor or whatever, and you're taking, you know, 30% of 50, it'd be 15, right? So you take 35. It's still 700 gold level 1 if you proc this on somebody worth of stats. That's just an armor. Like, if you include the magic resist as well, it's probably like 1,200 gold worth of stats. A lot of some of the best runes out there are going to give you like maybe 500 gold early on, maybe. That's still really rough. A lot of the ones that give you really, really good value, like past 500, are runes that don't really come online until like 20 minutes. You're thinking of stuff like Dark Harvest or Gathering Storm or Eyeball Collection. This other stuff that just requires different conditions. Either it takes a lot of time or you have to collect a lot of things or just achieve some sort of task to get the gold value. This just comes right off the bat, gives you a ton of gold value, and has respectable damage. This is 3.5% of your maximum health. Once again, that's not bonus health, that's max health. So early on, especially when you go in the resolve tree, you come back like really early in the game, you're probably going to have like 700, 800 health. And 3.5% of 800 is 28. So it does 68 damage at level 1 to everybody. So that is to, you you know, the direct person that you engaged on and to the support that you're close to too. So that's 136 damage. Wait, 68. Yes. Or 146. So that's a fail. Yeah, 136. I'm right. So 136 damage level 1. Even if you compare that to another, you know, damage mastery, right? Like Electrocute. You know, Electrocute's supposed to be this marquee damage rune. But level 1, 50% of your bonus AD, you're not going to have hardly any. Level 1, it's all going to be base AD. And it's going to be 50. So, you know, it's going to be 50, and then maybe you have, like, you know, your Doran's Blade, and that's it. You know, so it's going to be, like, 55 damage. So you've got this rune that gives you, like, 1,200 gold base stat level 1 in terms of your armor and magic resist bonus. And it does 136 damage to the bot lane when Electrocute does 55. And Electrocute's on a 50-second cooldown. And Aftershock is on a 20-second cooldown. You're starting to see why this rune's a problem. It's really, really strong. And it scales exceptionally well. So that's what's up with this. Is like a lot of the champions on this list, especially in the top 10, are going to be Aftershock. So Leona, Aftershock. Leona, Thresh, Tahm, Rakan, Blitz, Alistar, and Taric. I'm all going to recommend Aftershock on them. So the only 3 that are not Aftershock are Janna, Sona, and Zyra. So 7 of the 10 are Aftershock champions. And then even some down into here are going to be Aftershock, like Shin, Nautilus. So that's just the defining feature of this meta right now. It's just Aftershock. Aftershock and then Ingenious Hunter plus Ruby Sightstone plus Zombie Ward, which I've talked about that in the Soraka guide that I released recently. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a second. But first, let's talk about Leona. So, okay, we've got all these Aftershock champions. It's extremely powerful. And the deal also, like, I've known that Aftershock was really good, but I thought that the rest of the runes in the tree are really weak. I'm still not entirely convinced that they're amazing, but they are okay. Second Wind is actually pretty amazing. If we look at Second Wind here really quick. So you've got this tank, right? Like a Leona. Who's going to start off with like 800 health. Now you're going to get 4% of your missing health over 10 seconds. Whenever you get hit. It's taking any damage too. It's not auto attack damage. It's any damage. So if you just get tapped with like... I'd say that just something that just doesn't really do a lot of damage. Maybe like a Sivir Boomerang at the end. Like her final bounce of her Boomerang taps you, it still activates this. Or like a Gen W, after it goes through all the minions, it tags you at the end. It'll still trigger this. Okay? A Sona Q or something still triggers this. So 4% of your missing health over 10 seconds. So if we think, okay, let's say that you're missing even just 200 health, something super conservative. 200 health in lane is Leona. That's going to be 14 health over 10. So that's going to be a total of, let's say, 14 times 6 equals 84. Health is worth about 2.66 gold each. Actually, that's not about. That's exactly what it's worth. So you're getting about 223 gold worth of health every minute in lane. Assuming that this is constantly ticking, you're constantly taking hits from the enemy, and you're around missing around 200 health on average. I mean, if you're missing more, it gets even more valuable. If you're missing half your health, you're missing 400, you get double the value out of it. So out of your first minute, if you're missing 400 health, then right away it's a 440 gold value early per minute. So when you have a laning phase, you know, for the first like 3 minutes, then this is worth like 670 gold worth of regeneration. Which is really, really strong. I mean, it's basically like you're starting off with, you know, 84 extra health per minute in lane. So that's really, really powerful. It's like a little mini Doran shield. So that is actually much, much stronger than I thought. Now, obviously, Second Wind is not going to matter that much later in the game. But early game, it helps get you through that Sona lane, through that Leona or that Lulu lane. It just gives you a lot of resilience against harassment early on. So that's one thing. And then conditioning is actually a pretty good value as well. If you get 8/8, that's 160 plus, let's see, 18. That's a 304 flat gold value, and then it increases your total armor by 5%. So even if you have 100 each, then it's going to give you 190. That's about a 500 gold value, even if you have 100 armor and magic resist. Keep in mind your W after Aftershock also scales with this, I believe. So that extra armor that you get off of that adds with this. I'm not sure how those add together. I think it's additive, but I don't know. But either way, even just kind of the baseline scenario here is going to give you about 500 gold value. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I still think this is a really weak tree overall. Like this, I don't know what you'd call it, branch of the tree in strength is pretty weak. I usually get Font of Life. Now keep in mind this is over 2 seconds. It says that in the tooltip in-game, but it doesn't say it here. If it was 1% per auto, that would actually be pretty good. But it's 1% over 2 seconds. So usually what that translates into, that's what it translated into before, is on hit, it's like 40%. Then you get 60% over the next 2 seconds. Is what they ended up doing in terms of Stoneboard Pact before. So if you think you have 1,000 HP early... No, it's 0.004. I think it's just 4, right? Times 1,000. Yeah, just 4. Plus 5, though, is 9. So if they're hitting for, you know, if your ally's hitting for 100 damage early on, like hitting for 100 physical damage, that's about equal to 9% lifesteal. Give or take, with a little bit of extra on top. Now, this can affect multiple champions as well. You know, if you have 4 different allies that are all attacking the same champion that you marked, it's okay. It's decent. It's not amazing, though. It's not amazing. So it's about 9% lifesteal early on for each person who's attacking, or 4.5% lifesteal if they have 200 AD. Or conversely, if you have 2,000 health and they have 200 AD, it would still be worth about 9%. So, it's decent. It's decent. Then Demolish helps you take towers if you want that. I still am not a huge fan of Unflinching. It does give you some tenacity. Just okay, but it's not amazing. So overall, the Resolve tree is actually quite strong. A big thing about this is it also gives you 130 health, which is nice. So I've always known that Aftershock was really good. Just a question of, I thought these were really bad. But after trying out Second Wind's actually pretty legit in lane. And then Conditioning's like, okay, this is still pretty bad, but you get the 130 health on top of it. So ultimately, I think that this tree is really good. Mostly because of Aftershock Second Wind and the flat 130 bonus health that you get. Okay, so Leona specifically, why is she so good with this? And what's changed about Leona? I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's going to explain why a lot of these champions are really good, because a lot of it revolves around Leona, her strength, and then different counterpicks to Leona and counterpicks to those counterpicks. So, historically, the problem with Leona is it's really easy to counter-gank her, and she can get into bad situations early on, and she's very heavily reliant on Snowball. Historically, because she has no escape, she has no gap closers outside of her E, and her W... just hasn't historically offered her as much protection as something like a Nautilus Shield. And she doesn't displace people. She has to go to them all the way. And that's an issue a lot of times, because that means that you're kind of forced to tower dive if you want to fight with her. A lot of times in lane, you're going to take a couple of tower shots, because the way the lane's positioned... It has to be positioned in the middle in order for you to engage without without taking tower shots. So in order to engage with Leona, you usually need the lane to be about right here if you're on red side. But the problem is, you know, a lot of times, especially if you get ahead, then they're going to have to back up and just respect you. Unless your AD carry gets a really good freeze going on. She's great at freezing. But unless they get a great freeze going on, you're likely going to push up. And that means that if you want to engage them when they're farming, like, let's say your lane is pushed up to here, and you want to engage them and they're farming, like, right here, you're going to get pulled under tower, probably. Whereas when you're Thresh or Blitz, you can still try to hook them, and it'll pull them off the tower. But with Leona, you're going in. So that's the issue, is in order to have, if it's kind of an even fight, if both ADCs are about even, and both supports are about even, then it's going to be really difficult to win that fight while you're taking tower shots without help. And that also exposes you to the jungler coming in. So she's really good in some lane positions if it's a neutral lane position, but if it starts favoring the enemy, if you're pushing into their territory, then it's a lot harder to take advantage of her. It's more difficult to take advantage of her than of her strengths than someone like I said, Thresh, Blitz, Zyra. All of these people can harass or at least threaten people under tower a lot more than she can. And if you're far behind, she can peel, but she doesn't peel as well as a lot of other champions out there. She doesn't knock people back at all, like Alistar or Thresh. And sometimes it's really hard to stick to the champion that you want. So if there's a bunch of champions like piled in together trying to get your AD carry, and you E onto them, it might pull you back behind them. I mean, obviously you can like ult and then Q. You know, these are fairly short duration CC chains though. And they're designed to be used offensively. So she's much more of an offensive champion. She does have some defensive capabilities, but it's much more limited than Alistar or Thresh. Okay, so these have been problems historically with her. She's very susceptible to ganks. She requires a very neutral lane position in order to really leverage her kit. Because also, if it's pushing into you over here, then you're going to be fighting through minions. Which actually, with her current state, is okay if you want to fight through minions. Because she gets so much armor, it's ridiculous. So if you're pushed in near your tower, then you can engage on them and fight a lot of the time. But that's been her problem. So what changed about her? Well, she did receive direct buffs recently to do a lot more damage. So if we look at her history, then back on 7/17, they actually changed her. So this was right before the World's patch on 7/18. Her Shield of Daybreak cooldown is always 6 seconds now, which is awesome, which means you don't have to level it. Because right now, it's really rough if there's a support where you want all 3 abilities. Sometimes even where you want like 2 abilities that are maxed out early, because you're not going to have enough levels for that, because they got rid of catch-up experience. And so some of those powerful supports have to really be champions that can function on just 2 abilities, which is kind of one point wonder. Like, it's really good if you have 1 point in it, but you don't need any more points. And so for Leona, that has become Q. Now, before this change, you really wanted to level up your W first, because that's your defensive steroid, but then also, you really needed to level up your E and your Q. Other champions that you don't need to level a lot of stuff. I mean, Thresh, you don't really need to level up Lantern most of the time, or Flay. You can choose one or the other. Someone like Rakan doesn't need to level up his Q. Tahm Kench does like all of his abilities, but he can do without leveling up Grayskin. And Zyra can do without either leveling up her seed or her Q. So a lot of these good supports don't have to level up a ton of their abilities to be effective. So that's the number 1 change, is they made it to where she was a 2-skill champion instead of needing to level all 3. And they increased her damage a lot. So it's an extra 25% damage early on, and then later on it's like an extra 40% damage as she scales later into the game. So think of this Sunlight as extra damage on her abilities. Now, they lowered the duration from 1.5 seconds to 3.5, but in a fight, people are going to be auto-attacking pretty quickly usually. So yeah, you might miss some of this damage, but a lot of times they're still going to proc the Sunlight. And now it does a lot more damage. So just think of this once again as her abilities. And they buffed her armor by 25% early on her W, which is really nice. And she was one of the champions that benefited from plus 20 armor, which was the best stat boost across the board for the most part. So she got the 20 extra armor, which is 400 gold worth of stats. She got a buff to her W, which makes it a lot more effective early. And then just prior to that, she got buffs to her damage output and to a massive buff to her cooldown, especially early on one of her best crowd control abilities. And she's a really good user of Aftershock, because Aftershock scales with her W. So if we look at her W, how you usually play Leona, so that's 25% extra damage on her abilities. So, you know, something like Eclipse looks like it doesn't do much damage. Like, oh, it only does 60 damage. False. It does 85 damage because of the Sunlight proc. And then later on, it's like, oh, it only does 220 damage. No, it does 364 damage at level 18. You know, you're not going to be getting AP, so that doesn't matter too much. But you just got to keep in mind that all of her abilities, you have to add on this extra Sunlight damage most of the time. This is area of effect, too, so it hits a lot of people in a team fight. But usually for her trade patterns is you go E, if you're going to hit it, then you turn on your W. As soon as you turn on your W, you're going to get all of this bonus armor. And then as soon as Aftershock triggers, then all of that armor that you already have on your W goes into the Aftershock calculation. So I'm pretty sure that's how it works. It stacks the abilities in the order that you use them, I believe. So that means that if you turn this on, you're going to be getting like 100 armor at level 2, because you're going to start off with whatever she starts at, 47 armor. You turn this on, you're just going to get a flat, let's just not even count the bonus armor there. Let's just say you get 25. So you're going to get 25 armor. So that's going to bump you up to 62 armor. Total armor. 30% of 62. Plus 20. Flat that you get. So it's literally at level 1. If you turn on your W, well, I guess it'd have to be level 2 because you can't trigger Aftershock at level 1. But it's going to be over 100. If level 2, you go E, and then your W, E onto somebody in W, then you're going to have 100 armor for 2.5 seconds, which is just crazy. So yeah, that makes you pretty unkillable. That's going to reduce total damage on you by 50% from physical sources. So that's why she's so strong. She had a bunch of buffs recently, and her W has some insane synergy with Aftershock itself. So now it's not as dangerous to go in, right? So if the jungler shows up sometimes, you can even just kill the jungler, especially if it's a physical damage jungler. Your Q is 6 seconds, so even if you go all in and engage, now you're going to have your Q up if the jungler comes in for a counter gank a lot of the times. And she does, this is a lot of damage. If you've noticed Leona and you're like, oh my god, how is that so much damage? A lot of it's from Aftershock. Adds 80 damage to her kit, and then early on, you know, the Sunlight, the 25 damage, if she does her 3-hit combo, you get 25 on each of these. That's plus 75 total. And then you get, 60, 135, 195, plus 30, 225, plus Aftershock is like 70 by level 3 or more. So that's like 300 damage. And then you get an auto attack plus a reset. That's like 400 damage at level 3 that she can dish out with her full combo. So that's a lot of damage. And that's why she catches people off guard. I mean, she can almost zero people out by herself. She just has a lot of damage in her kit. She's super tanky. And she has a really low cooldown ult. So she's excellent at roaming. So it's only a 90-second ult. Has pretty good engage range. So even if you don't land the stun, sometimes just landing the slow is still really strong. I mean, 80% slow is still pretty good. It's going to allow you to hit them with the E if they don't have some kind of mobility spell. So yeah, That's what makes Leona really good, is that she has a ton of damage early on. She's very tanky. She can just ignore minion waves. She can ignore a couple of tower shots. Most of the time she wants to dive. And she scales really well into the late game because this scales with bonus armor and magic resist, as does Aftershock. And Aftershock's damage scales with health. So if she just gets a lot of health, and then armor and magic resist, she just becomes this, you know, just unkillable beast later in the game that has a really short cooldown initiate that also does pretty good damage. I mean, in a team fight later in the game, you know, 220 damage once you get to level 9, 220 plus 7 per level. It's what, 63, 73, 81. So 300 damage to everybody when you go in off of Eclipse. That also makes you really tanky in a team fight. It's a lot of damage that she does. So, and it's any damage dealt by champions consume sunlight. So if like Twitch ults across everybody in a fight, it automatically triggers all the sunlight procs. Or if Varus like throws a W on somebody, triggers all of it. Or Sivir, just anybody. So it doesn't have to be auto attacks that trigger this. So if you just Eclipse and hit somebody in a fight, any of those area of effect abilities are all going to trigger it. So that's what makes it really strong. Ton of damage early, really good scaling late, really nice engage. The meta right now is really, and one of her main nemesis, Janna, has been nerfed a lot as well. And so Janna historically is very, very good to Leona because her Tornado, and that's where this change to Janna's Tornado specifically is a lot tougher for Janna in this matchup because the Tornado is slower. And so that lets Leona get closer. Because what typically will happen is Leona will try to hook on with Zenith Blade onto somebody, then Janna tornadoes and knocks her out of her path. And then Leona can't connect with her Q. But now, because the tornado is a bit slower, then Janna or Leona gets just a little bit closer with her Q. And a lot of times now, unless the Janna started the tornado before you even threw your E, a lot of times you're still going to be close enough to Shield of Daybreak. So, you know, that makes this matchup a lot tougher, specifically because of that change to Janna's Tornado to make it slower. This is the worst matchup where that is affected. The worst matchup for Janna. Like, this has really turned the matchup in favor of Leona. In addition to all of the, you know, all of the other changes that I just mentioned that make Leona really strong, that specific matchup that was a hard counter to Leona is no longer as much of a hard counter. So that's what makes Leona really good. So she is must pick, must ban. I'm pretty sure she's the highest win rate support. Must pick, must ban, or must counter. There is counterplay to her. Okay, so this is what I recommend. Just Aftershock, Font of Life, Conditioning, Second Wind, Zombie Ward, and Genius Hunter. Then items, usually Ninja Tabi. If you want to get Mercs, you can get Mercs. You can get Mobility Boots, but I wouldn't do it in this meta. Especially because she has such great scaling on Aftershock and W with armor. I would just get the Ninja Tabi most of the time. You'd be a little bit slower, but you're just so much tankier, especially if you want to tank tower shots. And then you want to try to get to Locket of the Iron Solari and Knight's Vow really quickly most of the time. You can also sneak in a Frozen Heart somewhere sometime if you want. If you go for this build, you don't have CDR on Ruby, you don't have CDR on your boots, and you don't have CDR on Locket. So you're really going to be hurting for CDR, which is kind of rough. You know, tanks really like CDR, and you can't itemize for CDR with your blue runes anymore. So in theory, you can still go for a build. It's like I have the Equinox, like Ninja Tabi, I have the Equinox Knight's Vow, if you wanted to, and that would still give you 20% early, and then you could, in theory, even go for Frozen Heart and just skip Locket of the Iron Solari. But I'm really a huge fan of this video, or this build, and I mentioned this before because this just gives you insane vision control. Because of the interaction between Ingenious Hunter, Zombie Ward, and Ruby Sightstone. I talk about this a ton on the stream, so I'm not going to go super in-depth about it right now, but basically how this works is Ingenious Hunter, every time you get a kill or an assist, it lowers the cooldown of your active item abilities by 6% up to 30, and then it has a base 10%. So that can give you up to 40% item active cooldown. If you get Ruby Sightstone, that's an additional 20%. So that's 60% cooldown on any active items, including Sweeper. So Your sweeper is typically 75 seconds. Your sweeping lens when you hit level 9, and even your sweeper before that is still about the same time. Once you have a maxed out Ingenious Hunter and Ruby, then that goes down to 30, and it sweeps for 10 seconds. That means you turn this on, you sweep for wards, and then you only have to wait an additional 20 seconds before you can sweep again. So you can have your sweeper up 1/3 of the game at that point, just constantly spamming it and clearing out wards. So it makes it almost impossible to keep wards up against Leona. Because if you have this and you consistently clear out wards, it's just very, very difficult to deal with. I mean, let me show you one of my op.ggs really quickly. Now, I will preface to say I haven't had the best of seasons. So when you see the stats so far, it's been a rough preseason, okay? It's been rough. But I just want to show you this one game here where I played Thresh with this combination, just what's possible when you go Ingenious plus Ruby Sightstone plus Zombie Ward. Look at this differential, okay? I just want you to look at this. I placed 92 wards. 92 wards in a 35-minute game compared to my opponent's 37 wards who didn't have this. And I destroyed 13. Actually, no. I destroyed 26. He destroyed 17. And I placed 13 control wards. Now, that's vision control. That right there is vision control, okay? So that's what I'm talking about with this build. It's just crazy. And that's only a small piece of the puzzle, right? That's a pretty big piece in that every time you kill a ward, you get another ward. You get a zombie ward that lasts for 3 minutes, which is really good. Especially if you have pressure on the map and they can't go clear it out, you get free wards. So that's really powerful. But then also, that's 60% cooldown on Locket. So now your Locket of the Iron Solari goes on basically like a 30-second cooldown. I think it's like 36 seconds, so it's a 90-second typically. Yeah, 36-second cooldown. So that means your Locket is up almost every wave of minions, which is crazy. And you're building Ruby Sightstone to build into it, so you're going to have a lot of health. In addition to building into the Resolve tree and getting that bonus 130 health. So, and just being a tank, I think it's actually based on bonus health, not total health. So being a tank doesn't matter. But getting the extra health from your tree and getting extra health from Ruby Sightstone early is huge. Another aspect of that is if you decide to go for Knight's Vow, that's also a 90-second cooldown, so you can change your partner every 30 seconds, which is huge, especially when you're roaming around. Because sometimes, you know, you want to put your Knight's Vow on your jungler and say, okay, we're about to, you know, do this fight, let me put Knight's Vow on this person. Then you're afraid, you're like, well, it has to stay on that person for 90 seconds if you don't have this build. And so you might need, when the next fight rolls around, after the current skirmish you're involved in, you might need to put it back on your AD carry. Well, this just lets you switch that back and forth a lot, which is nice. You can also go for something like Face of the Mountain, which will lower the cooldown on Face of the Mountain. I think it's a 60-second cooldown. That'll take it down to 24 seconds. So you can have up your Face of the Mountain a lot more. If you want to build Redemption, it's kind of awkward on Leona, but later on we talk about Rakan, you can build Redemption on Rakan, and that goes down to like a 45-second cooldown. If I haven't tried it, but in theory you could do something like ZZ Rock Portal and get those the portals down to like a 36-second cooldown. Or no, they're 2 minutes. That would be like a 45, 50-second cooldown. So there's a lot of potential with Ingenious Hunter. Especially with Locket and especially with the Sweeper Trinket. So I think that is worth trading whatever else people get out of this. I mean, I guess you could go for like Sorcery Tree for Scorch. I think a lot of people go into the Inspiration Tree. Yeah, a lot of people go Inspiration. They probably just get something like Boots and Futures Market. No, Boot and Futures are in the same thing. I guess Boot and maybe Celestial Body for the 100 health or the 5% CDR. He does Hex Flash. I really don't like Hex Flash. Yeah, I would probably... I mean, you could just go Boots and Cosmic Insight if you want. But I just don't think that's worth sacrificing Ingenious Hunter and Zombie Ward. Not only for the vision control, but because she wants Locket anyway. She wants Face the Mountain anyways, usually. And it's just so good on those items. I think a lot... And I think a lot of people just haven't discovered the power. Like, this is a normal build on Leona. Like, Ruby Sightstone, Locket, Face. You're not going out of your way for that at all. Like, that's just what she normally builds. Knight's Vow. You know? So she already has all of these active items. So, or even if you want to go something like Righteous Glory. I'm not a huge fan of the Righteous Glory build, but I don't think she needs help engaging. But you can get it if you want. It does give you some mana. It does give you some CDR. It's legit. You know, it's pretty good. So in theory, you could even go Righteous Glory. So I don't understand why people don't get this. Like, you're not getting that much out of this. I mean, yeah, you can Hex Flash out of a bush and E somebody maybe, but I don't know. It feels really gimmicky to me. It takes 2.5 seconds to warm up Hex Flash. I think these pros are just trying this out for fun. But yeah, I don't think Inspiration offers you enough stuff. The boots are nice, but I just think a lot of people are sleeping on Ingenious. So I differ from virtually everybody else that does this. Is Gorilla building, is he building it? No, he's got Zombie Ward. Dude, get Ingenious. Forget Relentless Hunter. Come on, bro. But anyways. Okay, so Leona, very strong. This is what I recommend for her. So yeah, that's it. Now that I've spent like 30 minutes on Leona, yeah, we can move on to the next champion. But it's important. That wasn't all Leona stuff. It's important to realize that a lot of that stuff is going to apply to a lot of these champions. I'm going to recommend Ingenious plus Zombie Ward on a lot of people. It's going to be these same runes on a lot of people. And so it's important, and the same items on a lot of people too. So it's important to recognize that. That's why. It's because that setup is particularly very powerful on a lot of champions. Okay, so Thresh, next up, same setup as Leona. Okay, so it's just a different version of Leona in terms of itemization and runes. All right, but what is it about Thresh? Thresh is a very high skill cap champion, first of all. He's the most difficult support to play in the game because he has some difficult mechanics to him. His hook is a very slender skill shot with a slight delay on it that experienced players will be able to dodge a lot of the time open field. And then his flay is a very quick cooldown that has lots of applications, but you have to know when to do it and you have to be expecting it. So you can knock people out of their gap closer abilities with this. So you can knock Jarvan out of his flag and drag. Most notably, you can knock Leona out of her E. So this is why he's up so high, is because he has a very, very good matchup against Leona. So what you do with her is she tries to engage with her E. You flay her back with your E. And then you hook her with your Q. And then that'll allow your AD carry to land some harass, and she's not going to be able to trade anything back. So you just auto-attack her with your AD carry as she runs away after you hook her. Most of the time. Unless she's low, you might be able to go all in. But yeah, that's what makes him specifically good against Leona. But then he's also good against a lot of these other champions. So he's very good against Jarvan and just any other tank that's just trying to dive the back line. She can usually deal with them, or he can usually deal with them with his flay. And he has pretty good engage too. So unlike Leona, he doesn't have to go in on these. So you can just land your hook and just let your team blow him up if you want. But you can also go in on the hook if you want to engage more fully. And a lot of these new runes cover up a gap that Thresh has had too, which is really bad armor early on. So a lot of people think of Thresh as this, you know, crazy tank who can just go in there and soak all these hits. And that's not true in the early game. He has some of the lowest base armor in the game for a tank. So now he has 28. So he did get some bonus. So he used to only have 16. So even champions like Janna and Soraka had more armor than him. Whereas I don't think that's the case anymore. Let me look and see. Just for novelty's sake. No. So he has the same armor as Janna though. So she doesn't have more than him anymore, but he still has the same armor as Janna. So you got to keep that in mind. He is very, very squishy early on, and that's to balance around the fact, and he gets no armor per level. So that's to balance around the fact that when he collects souls, it gives him an extra 0.75 bonus armor. So this sounds like, oh my god, he scales really hard, but the thing is, games are faster, like I mentioned before. And then also a lot of the more traditional tanks like Leona are going to get like at least 3 per level. It doesn't say here what that is per level, but yeah, it's something like 3 per level, 3.3 per level, something like that. So that means that he has to collect like 7 souls per level just to keep up, which he's not going to keep up early game with that. Now, late game, maybe. But either way, he doesn't start off with a lot of armor, and he doesn't get that much more armor than, at least in many of the games, than just a tank who naturally scales. So he has that fantasy of getting all this crazy armor, you know, if he gets like a zillion souls. But in a lot of games, especially quicker games, he's just not going to be able to get quite that many souls. So this has been a problem. Now, Thresh has been very powerful historically, but this has been one of his main weaknesses, is that he doesn't have a ton of armor early on. Well, now that's fixed, right, with Aftershock, because he gets this huge like armor infusion. So now he gets a free 20 whenever he engages, plus 30% of his base, which is not a lot, but it's still like 9 and some change. So now he's getting 29 extra armor. So that's putting up to 57 armor at level 1. So that's really good for Thresh. So yes, it's not the same as like the 100 armor Leona. Now you're seeing some differences, right, in Thresh and Leona. You know, Leona at level 2 is going to have like 100 armor when she goes in, and Thresh is going to be like, hey man, what's up? I'm at like 60. But 60 armor is still pretty good for a trade early on. The 80 carry is still not going to be doing a ton of damage to you whenever you do that, and you can still largely ignore minion hits. So it's not the 100 that Leona has, but it's a lot more than 28. You know, he's coming from a much lower base. So if you want to think about it that way, he gets basically double armor off of it, and Leona starts at 47, so she gets basically double armor. She goes from, you know, 47 to like 100, low hundreds. So it does sort of, it doubles him and it doubles her in terms of their armor. So that's something that just helps him out tremendously early on. Also, he can historically get harassed out by champions like Nami, like Zyra, who have been good matchups into him early, because he's had low magic resist, and he doesn't get the full tank magic resist per level either. They just last season gave him MR per level. Historically, he doesn't get any. But now he gets Second Wind, which helps him survive a lot of the harassment early on. So these runes very heavily favor Thresh, because they give him extra defense and extra survivability early, which is something that he has lacked. And now he can do his full suite of things. He has all this great versatility, he has great offense, great defense, and pretty good scaling with his souls. Even though, as I explained before, the armor scaling is not going to be as big. It's just a traditional tank most of the time. But this fixes a lot of Thresh's early game survivability issues. So that makes him really good. And, you know, he has a great matchup into Leona, because the Flay just completely wrecks her engage. And if someone else gets engaged on, you can always throw them a lantern, and unless they get popped instantly, they're going to be able to get out. So he has a lot of tools in his toolkit. Everybody's aware of Thresh and how powerful he can be. I will say, if you want to play Thresh, just do not take those hooks most of the time. It's fine just to hook somebody, just as some long-range crowd control for a second and a half, and just let people harass them. You don't always have to take the hook to hard engage. So yeah, there's the Thresh runes and items again. Same thing as Leona for the most part. Now, Thresh really does like his CDR, and he doesn't have to get in the fight as much as Leona. He can kind of hang back and throw hooks. So you can go something like Ionian Boots on Thresh if you want, and you can prioritize something like a Frozen Heart earlier than Locket if you want to. And Knight's Vow, you know, I would probably say a lot of times you might want to go Frozen Heart before you go Knight's Vow, because he only gets half the benefit from Knight's Vow. It's only 6% damage redirection and 6% healing from Knight's Vow, because he counts as a ranged champion. And someone was asking me that the other day on stream. They're like, is he ranged? Yes, he is ranged. 450. It counts as ranged. So That makes it harder to proc Relic Shield, and that makes Knight's Vow not as attractive as an option on him. You can also, even if you want to, against like a Janna or some other kind of farm off lane, if you feel so inclined, you can go coin on him. Eventually turn it into Talisman for better engages and just farm up a lot of gold early on. That's going to give you less, all-in potential. So that's why most of the time you want to go Relic Shield into Targon's Brace for that extra health. Especially because Aftershock now scales with health. The damage on it. But, if it's just going to be a farm off anyways, you can, in theory, run coin. Or if you can't land those Relic Shield procs, if it's just really hard for you to do it because you don't have to execute, then just go ahead and run coin. If you're going to mess up a lot of your 80 carry CS, just go coin instead. It's fine. Okay, and this brings us to one of my personal favorites. Now, I love Thresh. Leona's okay. I like Leona too, but I really love Tahm Kench. Tahm Kench is someone that I played a lot of in Season 6. A lot of Kench, at least for me. Right, this is before I just started streaming in the back half of this year. And so I had a lot less games in Season 6 than Season 7. But for a lot of that season, I was in the 60% plus with Tahm Kench. It was only at the very end of the season for the last, like 70 games or so that I really underperformed on him. I was probably running like a 40-something%. And the reason is it shifted over to the Redemption sort of Janna meta back then and moved away from... And Tahm Kench also got nerfed several times in Season 6. Now, he recently has received a couple of really nice quality of life buffs. If we look at old Kench here. So he did get nerfed back then, especially his grayskin hurt his survivability quite a lot. And they changed the way that his R worked to make it a lot less effective. But they just recently loosened up on that a little bit. So Tahm Kench is another one who had some buffs under the radar that a lot of people didn't cover very well, except for me. Sort of like Leona. So in 720, he got several buffs. Okay, so number one, attacks or damage per attack increased. So this isn't a massive deal. It's a lot better for top lane Tahm Kench, but it's pretty good. It's just a little bit of extra damage on your attacks. Decent. Now, this is something that is really nice. Devour Lockout. So you can spit your allies out 1 second faster, or you can spit enemies out 1 second faster. This is really important, especially on champions like Twitch. So historically, Tahm Kench hasn't been great with Twitch because he used to have a 2-second lockout, which means when you eat him, you can't spit your ally back out for 2 seconds. And if you eat Twitch while he's trying to ult, then he's going to lose 40% of his ult damage because it's only on 5 seconds. So, a common thing if you pick Tahm with Twitch is he would open up, someone would immediately target him like Leona or something like that, and you would have to save him with your W, and he would lose a lot of his damage anyways. So that's not nearly as punishing as it used to be. So especially on Kog'Maw and Twitch, two champions that have a very small window of power where they just want to auto attack as much as possible while they have their steroid on, then this is a lot better for that. And then also, Devour is not on a lockout after teleporting, so you can teleport in. If it's kind of a rough fight, you can teleport in, devour the person who is being, who's about to die, and just eat them immediately. You don't have to wait that 1 second. So you can just roll up, appear, eat them, run. So that's really powerful too. So those are two really nice quality of life buffs for Tahm Kench. I don't think he got any more that season. No, these were his nerfs. Oh, they changed his, I didn't remember that they changed his autos in Season 6 halfway through. Bonus net magic damage, increased, okay, they increased his tongue lash damage. Then his gray skin. Yeah, it used to give you back 100% of the gray skin damage. Or no, it used to give you back a percentage of grayskin damage, but 100% of the damage you took went into your grayskin. And the active shield only lasts 3 seconds instead of 6. Yeah. Oh, they took his ult and turned it into a passive. Okay, so it used to just give fish and not have any sort of effect. Okay. Yeah, they gave it a cast delay, so they gave him a longer warning time by a half a second. And they gave it a 0.75 cast delay. Okay, so it gave about an extra 1 second before you would arrive, basically. Yeah, so that was really a major nerf to him. And they decreased the width of his tongue lash Q, which was pretty big, so it makes it a lot harder to hit in lane. Yeah, and they gave it a delay on his R. So they gave him several delays, quality of life problems. They reduced his stack duration early on and just did a couple other things to him. So he was really powerful for the first half of Season 6. I mean, he wasn't like super oppressive in the meta or anything, but he was pretty good. And if you go back pretty far in the day, I think they changed this in Season 5, but yeah, they took away the movement speed. He used to actually be able to eat somebody, and when he was running away, he would get like a bonus 25% move speed or something. So it's just almost impossible to catch him. And that was pretty troll. So now you only get that movement speed if you're running towards people. But yeah, he's been changed a lot over time. But historically, Tahm Kench is a very good counter to hard engaged champions. So he counters Thresh and Leona really hard. He's the hardest counter to Leona in the game. So you'll see him a lot of the time at top end play as someone who is picked specifically to counter pick Leona. Because if Leona ever engages on anybody, you just eat him. And then you just tongue lash Leona, auto attack her a couple of times, and just tongue lash her again. She's stunned, and you're probably going to kill her. So, Kench is very, very good into Leona. And similarly, if Thresh ever hooks him, I use eat him out of it. So he is very, very good. I mean, you could put him as high as number 1 right now because he counters number 1 and number 2 so heavily, but he's not as strong like of a well-rounded pick. Because he doesn't have hard engage. So he's a very good counter pick. He does counter the top 2 picks. But by himself, if you're picking him first and they pick something like, you know, a Sona, a Taric, a Janna, or, you know, they pick a Twitch and you pick like a Sivir or something on your team, you're not going to be able to do a lot about that if their team scales harder than yours. So he's a really good anti-engage, but he doesn't have engage himself. So he's still really strong, but I mean, you can blind pick him if you want, but he's best as a counter pick. If Leona's up, and for some reason you don't want to pick Leona into their team, or you're afraid they might Tahm Kench you, you can go ahead and Tahm Kench them. There isn't really like a super hard like counter to him in lane. Like Zyra's really good against him. Zyra's probably the best. A lot of people aren't playing Zyra. Blitzcrank can kind of work around him because you displace them so much that it makes it difficult. Like, you can blow them up before Tahm Kench can eat them sometimes. Tom's still all right into Blitz. I don't think that Sona and Janna can put down enough harassment through Second Wind and Grayskin to deal meaningful damage to him, to harass him out of lane anymore. So, anyways, so yeah, this is his marquee move. Basically, you want to be leveling this up to level 9. You get like 3 points in Tongue Lash in lane, and then you switch over to his W. If anyone ever hits your ally with anything, or if your ally just looks like they're in trouble, you can just eat them. This even helps against Jarvan, because you can just eat them and spit them out over Jarvan's wall. Now, Jarvan's still going to be beating on you, but, you know, that's better than beating on your AD carry. Now, the one knock against Tahm Kench is he doesn't use Aftershock very well. Because he doesn't have any sort of major crowd control that's really easy to proc. So you can tongue lash somebody and get a stun if you get 3 hits of acquired taste on them, and that will proc Aftershock. Or if you devour an enemy, that'll suppress them and that will proc Aftershock. But all of that takes a little bit of time to do. So you can try Aftershock on it, but I think Guardian ultimately is probably a little bit better. The problem with Guardian, and they really need to buff this ability, is it's a 45-second cooldown. And it's not even that strong to begin with. It's like, it's okay, you know? Gives like a decent little shield with some movement speed. It's just this 45-second cooldown is a really big deal. So I don't know why this is 45 seconds and Aftershock is 20. Feels like either Aftershock should be 45 or this should be 20. Or make them both 30 or something like that. so that it's once per wave. But Guardian needs a little bit of love in terms of the cooldown. I think the numbers are fine on it, because both people get the shield, so that's equal to like a 300 shield. Then 10% of the person's bonus health, that's not their total health, it's bonus. Aftershock, for some reason, is max health. I think Aftershock should be bonus health as well. Like, I think all of this stuff should be bonus. Bonus armor, bonus health, all of that. That would help balance it out a little bit better. But for some reason, yeah, this is total armor, total magic resist, total health, and 20-second cooldown. Whereas Guardian is, you know, bonus health and 45-second cooldown. So it's not amazing. It's okay if you want to go for that on Kench. The other option that I lay out here, so basically you go the same build, except you get Guardian instead of Aftershock. Just Guardian, Font, Conditioning, Second Wind, Zombie, and Genius. Or you can go Glacial Augment, Biscuit Delivery, Magical Footwear, Celestial Body, and then Zombie and a Genius. Celestial kind of makes up for not going too deep in the health tree. Gives you 100 health instead of the 135. Now, you can still go in the health tree. I'm kind of torn about this because I really, really like Zombie Ward and Ingenious Hunter. But you, in some matchups, you might need to go into the health tree just so that you can get Conditioning plus Second Wind in like a heavy harassment lane. I could see that. But the reason that you get Glacial Augment is it adds a slow to your auto attack and it makes it much easier to devour people. So if Leona goes in, then you auto attack her with the Glacial Augment, she's going to be slowed down, and then you can auto attack her twice more and get the Q stun on her. So it just makes it a lot easier, especially against melee champions, to stick to people. Makes it harder for them to get away. So if they ever buff Glacial Augment, if they add a little bit of extra damage to it, or they increase the slow, or you know, I think they could safely increase the slow a little bit more, or maybe the cooldown on it, like take the cooldown to like 4 seconds. Make it to where you can really stick to somebody with it. Then I think that'll tremendously benefit Tahm Kench. Right now, you can use Glacial if you want. And just how you play him is you just mostly use your W to disengage off of hooks. You can eat people. I would say in general, favor saving allies rather than eating enemies if you can. If you do decide to eat enemies, though, he does a lot of damage. It's not showing the damage that he does. Or am I just missing it? It doesn't. Reduce duration, movement speed, duration. Oh, okay. It's got two different. It's got a tab. That's weird. Okay, so you've got Devour. Then when you spit them out, it does up to 32% of their max health. That's like a lot of damage, but even against tanks. So like you're hitting Cho'Gath for like 1,000 magic damage or something when you do that. So it's really powerful, and this lets him actually solo 80 carries later on. So if you warp in behind an 80 carry, you auto attack him and eat him. You could probably solo a lot of 80 carries as Tahm Kench, especially immobile ones. So that's frustrating for some 80 carries, but it makes Tahm really strong as well. Or just like other tanks that don't do a lot of damage, you can maybe solo them out if they don't have a lot of healing. So if you're trying to fight a like a Malachi or something like that, you might actually be able to win the fight. So what you do typically is you tongue lash, that slows them down, auto, eat them. You hold them in your mouth as long as you possibly can. And then you spit them out and immediately tongue lash them again. And then just keep autoing them. So as they keep getting fish on them, then they take their max health damage too. So, you know, you end up doing 5.25% of their max health. Oh, that's his max health. Okay, so it does 5% of your max health as bonus magic damage. So that's even better against squishy targets. So that just gives him a lot of really good scenarios where he can just do persistent damage in fights if he needs to. He can peel with his tongue lash, which can also double as a stun if you have 3 stacks on him. Stunning them does not remove the stacks. Eating them does remove the stacks. And he also has really good macro potential because he has 120-second, basically TF ult, where he like warps about half the length of the map, depending on the level that he has in it. And he takes a friend with him. So you can warp with a jungler, you can warp with, you know, your AD carry. There are just so many applications of this. I mean, the most obvious one in the laning phase is if you just walk out of the lane and you just ult with your jungler behind the enemy. That's almost always free kills. After you get kills, you can rotate really quickly to go take towers or dragon or inhibitor. There are just so many good uses for Abyssal Voyage. Also, you can ult with Zeke's Convergence and then cancel it in a fight, and Zeke's triggers off of that. So Zeke's has an internal cooldown of 45 seconds. If you go for the Ingenious build, Ingenious Hunter plus Ruby Sightstone, it goes down to an 18-second cooldown. And so if you just activate Abyssal and cancel it immediately, it gives you the 10-second Zeke's Convergence buff, which gives your AD carry like an extra 25 on-hit damage. And gives you that little glacial aura, which helps you stick to people, which is very good for Tahm Kench. And it does a lot of damage over time to him. So that's pretty nice. That means this is going to be up. If you want this to be up, it could be up like 50% of the time in fights, right? So it lasts for 10 seconds, goes on an 18-second cooldown. I don't know if the cooldown starts when you activate it or after the effect ends. I'm not sure. But either way, that's a really good combo as well. Okay, so Tahm Kench, great position right now. Excellent against Thresh, excellent against Leona, excellent against a lot of the champions on this list. He's great against Alistar, has really good macro, pretty good scaling, decent synergy with the runes. Glacial Augment against melees, that's really good. Guardian's kind of, it's all right. But that's really his only knock right now is that he doesn't have hard engage, and he doesn't really use Aftershock that well. But other than that, he's great. I mean, he could, in theory, be the best support right now. Now, he's never going to have a high percentage because he's a pretty difficult support to play because he has a lot of decisions that are tough to make. So you have to decide, do you eat allies? Do you eat enemies? When do you pop your Grayskin? When do you regenerate with your Grayskin? Do you go for the Tongue Lash early to ensure that you're going to get the slow, or do you wait and try to get the stun with the Tongue Lash? So there are a lot of tough decisions with Tahm. Should you even try to go save that person who's in trouble? You might die trying to save them. So a lot of tough decisions. Your allies in general will love you as Tahm Kench because you're going to save them from doing stupid stuff a lot. You can save people from tower diving. You can save people who overextend. So a lot of people end up liking Tahm Kench. So if you like to get a lot of whatever you call it, honors at the end of the game, then you'll probably like playing Tahm Kench most of the time. Now, some people will rage at him. They'll say, why'd you eat me? I totally had him. But more likely than not, people really appreciate a good Tahm Kench. Okay, Rakan is another one. Man, it's taking a bit longer than I anticipated. We got to speed it up a little bit here. I still need to do one more coaching session before the stream tonight, so we'll pick it up a bit. So Rakan, very good right now. Excellent Aftershock user. It's the same drill as everybody else. Aftershock font, conditioning, second wind, zombie, and genius. But after Rakan, unlike other people, does have a pretty good heal and a shield with his Q and with his E and just his passive shield. So he can get redemption really early, which is good. So if you go like Ruby, Redemption, Locket, that's a very, very strong combination. He uses all three of those very well. So he's a really good zombie ward, Ingenious Hunter user. And as I mentioned before, he's someone who's pretty squishy early on. So Aftershock covers up a lot of his early game squishiness, kind of like how it does for Thresh. He can also get Talisman of Ascension, which is pretty good on him. Like he usually goes Coin, Talisman of Ascension. Oh, there's an items tab. Oh, I didn't realize that. That's actually really sweet. Nice. Now I don't have to like click and go looking for items. Wow, that's pretty cool. I actually like that a lot. Great change. There we go. So yeah, so I think that makes him really good. So he's an engaged champion that has similar scaling to someone like Janna, not quite as much, but similar in that he can do things like redemption if he wants. So he's kind of like the best team fighter. I would say that's pretty fair to say right now, is he's the best team fighter, engage, tank type of champion because he can use redemption and locket and Ruby Sightstone, Ingenious Hunter build. He can use all of that very, very well. And then he has a good, ultimate plus W initiate. That's still very hard to play around. They did slow down his speed on his W, but it's still really, really good, and they decreased the width. But he's still really strong. So I would expect to see him a lot in pro play, and he's very good in solo queue as well. But similar to Thresh and Tahm Kench, he's really hard to play. Because if you goof up, you're going to die with him. Aftershock does save you some, but you got to make sure that when you're going in, you have an exit plan, right? So when you go in with your ult, especially into a huge team fight, you need to ping a lot to make sure your team's on board, they know what you're doing, and you need to keep an eye out, make sure that you're going to be able to E away to somebody. If your team picks Zyra, you should pick Rakan every time if you know how to play him. It gives her a huge damage boost on her W, and it gives you a really long range so you can get out of fights very easily. But yeah, even without Zyra, he's still pretty good in a lot of situations where you just want that guaranteed, really hard engage, and you want the scaling. You know your team's going to be team fighting a lot. Like, let's say you have, I don't know, Twitch plus Kennen plus Talia or something like that. Like, you have just a wonderful team fight, Jarvan in the jungle. He's going to be really good. Now, he's pretty good in pick comps, too. So, if you have someone like a Kha'Zix or someone like, a Fizz or just any Kassadin, anyone that wants to pick people off, he's pretty good with that, too. So, he has a pretty low cooldown ult. They did lower the cooldown on his... Was it his ult? Yeah, I think it used to be 130, and they took it down to 120. So, they did lower the cooldown on his ult. So, he's got a really good ult. And yeah, so you can jump around, shield people, benefits a lot. Now, he lost wind speakers, which isn't great, but you can still get Ardent with him as well. That is an option. So, you could go something like Locket Redemption for the team fighting, and you can switch over to go Ardent. He can go Zeke's, so you can go for the double buff if you want, if your Twitch is getting really fed, and you were thinking about going Redemption, you're just like, well, forget it. I'm just going to go ahead and go... Ardent Sensor plus Zeke's and just ride the Twitch train. You can do that. So he has probably the most versatile build path of any support out there because he can build the Enchanter items and he can build tank items if he wants. So he can build almost anything and be very useful. And he's really safe. Now this is he can be. I just mentioned that he's actually very dangerous if you don't know how to get out with him. But at the same time, just walking around the map, he's the safest because he can use his W and just jump over walls and instantly get away from stuff. And he can ult. If someone tries to jump on him like a Kha'Zix, he can just ult really quickly and it gives him a move speed boost to run away. So it makes it very hard to track him down and kill him. So he's kind of like Janna in that respect. He's very safe just wandering around the map trying to ward a lot of the time. Especially because he's going to be, going things like Aftershock, like Conditioning, and, building things like Ruby Sightstone early on. And if he gets Talisman, that's going to help him escape as well. So he just has a lot of different options that are all pretty compelling in their own way in terms of itemization. And he can get away. So if you catch Leona or Thresh or Tahm Kench trying to ward in the enemy jungle, you're probably going to kill them unless they have backup. They're not getting away. They're not getting out. But Rakan is going to get away. He is going to get out. He doesn't have super amazing matchups into any of these three champions. But he's okay. A Thresh can knock him out of his W when he tries to go in. Tahm Kench can eat the person that he tries to knock up. And Leona can just beat him down. If she lands her E on him, he's probably dead. Or at least he's going to take a huge chunk of his health before he can escape. So he doesn't have amazing matchups into these three champions, and that's why he's number 4, but he's still pretty good overall. And like I said, he's one of the safest sort of roaming champions out there. Okay, slight change of pace here away from the Aftershock champions. We have Zyra. Now, a lot of people have been using Aerie on Zyra, but I personally think that she's always been a lot better with Comet because her plants lower the cooldown on Comet, so you can get it off multiple times in a fight. Now I think there's no question that Comet's far better on her. And she just does a lot of damage early on, you know, and a lot of magic damage. So if you have a lot of AD on your team, now people aren't playing as much AD as I thought they would. I thought we were going to be seeing a lot more Pantheon, Riven, Fiora, Kha'Zix, Kayn, Rengar. We are seeing some of that, but people are still playing a decent amount of AP champions out there. But it is nice to have that extra AP on your team. And Comet does a lot of damage early, and then the combination of Absolute Focus and Scorch do a lot of damage as well. Taste of Blood gives you some extra sustain in lane, which is something that Zyra has historically lacked, so it gives her a little bit of a better answer to things like Sona and Nami. She can all-in and kill them, but they can also poke her out, but now this makes it a bit harder to poke her out because of Taste of Blood. And then Eyeball Collection gives you pretty good scaling from the 20 to 30 minute mark when you get that extra 30 AP typically. And then on Zyra, you still want to go Sorcerer Boots, Eye of the Watchers, Leandri's, Void Staff, Rylai's later on, gives you a bit of safety, gives you some extra kiting capabilities, and then Zhonya's if you have to, against something like a Zed. But typically, as much as possible, you want to go Sorcerer Boots, Haunting Guys, and then upgrade at least to your tier 2 gold item, so that you get that extra movement speed and you can run away from things. And then I like getting Void Staff as the next item. It's very, very rare for me to have games where I go beyond these 4 items. These are very expensive and games are ending very quickly. But, you know, typically this is your core build. Unless you have to stop and get a Zhonya's because they have a 10-0 Zed that keeps targeting you. Okay, but Zyra, I mean, she's just a decent solution, particularly to Thresh and Tahm. She can harass them out early. She does quite a bit of damage. She can one-shot people in lane, like once you get to level 3. So she's an excellent pick with like a Jhin or a Misfortune. Just something that wants to go really hard early game. Then she's going to be a good choice. Draven. So she's good. She's just susceptible to assassins, like a lot of other champions. So if Zed gets fed, he's just going to massacre you. You know, the same thing with Kassadin or Kayn. Like, there are a lot of champions that are just going to be a huge problem if they get ahead against Zyra. So, Zyra is very strong in lane. She is the Bush Queen. Later on, if you get really good vision control, you can just 100 to 0 people. Now, another problem is kind of in the mid game, you can't really kill Leona and Thresh, like, or Tahm Kench, especially Leona and Tahm Kench. If they're going to ward, unless you're really far ahead, you're not gonna outright kill them in one spell rotation most of the time. Even if you like E, Q, plant, R, ignite, auto, you're still probably not gonna kill them. You'll do a lot of damage to them, but without any follow up, you can't kill them by yourself most of the time. Once they get that Ruby Sightstone and Null Magic Mantle on their way to lock it, it's going to be a lot harder. And things like Tahm Kench and Leona are going to build Locket of the Iron Solari, and that's going to take a lot of bite out of your damage in the mid game as well. So those champions, and it's harder to harass them out personally in lane because they're going to have second wind. So yeah, you can still harass them, and you can still be effective, but it's a bit harder. It's a bit harder than it used to be in lane. And if Leona hooks onto you, you're probably dead. Because Zyra's plants... Zyra's plants do not... don't block hooks. They do block hooks, they don't block Leona's engage. So they do block Thresh hooks, they do block Blitz hooks, but they don't block her little, whatever, Sunlight Sword that she extends. So that makes her... I think that tilts the scale slightly in favor of Leona. It's tough. It's about a skill matchup. It's about 50-50, but it might be closer to like 55 or 60% in favor of Leona. But overall, Zyra is still really strong. Great powerhouse early game if you really want to try to get those kills. Thresh and Leona can also get kills in lane pretty easily, but Zyra can do it. by herself a little bit more. If your AD carry is just not really wanting to do anything other than farm, Zyra can still kill him by herself sometimes. Okay, and then we get to our tier 2. So these are pretty good. I mean, you could blind pick any of these and be okay in the current meta. Like, there are some counterplays, obviously. Like, Tahm Kench is probably the biggest hoser to Leona. Leona can still, like, roam middle and try to make plays, but that's a pretty brutal counter pick. Also, Tahm Kench and a Thresh is pretty brutal. So it's possible Tahm Kench is the best blind pick right now. But I think that you could make an argument for any of these 5 champions being a really good first pick. All right, tier 2, Blitzcrank. A lot of people might have Blitz higher. I still like Blitz, but he still is very one-dimensional. If you miss those hooks, then he's just completely worthless. He does do a lot of all-in damage. I think that Aftershock, you know, and thinking about it, that just does give him a little bit better scaling. You can go with the Electrocute build if you want. But frankly, Aftershock does even more damage than Electrocute most of the time. And it gives you some defense, and it's on a lower cooldown. So it's really hard to go wrong with Aftershock right now. And then just get mobility boots on him, and then very similar. I do like Iceborne Gauntlet on him because he really, really wants that CDR and mana because he's completely reliant on his Q. If you don't have your Q, you're just worthless. So you need CDR on Blitzcrank. And Iceborne Gauntlet gives you some extra sticking power, and it gives you extra burst. It's going to add an extra 100% of your base AD onto your all-in rotation. So I think that's pretty good on him. So Blitz is pretty good. I mean, Blitz is not amazing into Leona, Thresh, and Tahm Kench because they can just fight you back if you hook them a lot of the time because they're going to have Aftershock. In the case of Tahm Kench, he's not going to have Aftershock, but these guys will. And so it's going to make it very difficult to burst them down. And he's not great against Zyra either, a good Zyra player, because her plants will be able to block his hooks. But he still is pretty good. He's pretty good. You know, especially if you can hit the AD carry. Now, another thing is, you know, champions like Ezreal are very popular. Lucian's very popular. And these are very difficult to hook. So mobility is at a premium right now. Tristana can jump out of the hook if she times her W correctly. So he's okay. He's okay. Like, he still has, you know, world-renowned roam. Once you get those Moby boots, you can just run up and down the river and go terrorize the mid lane, go terrorize the jungle. So there are a lot of applications to him. But at the same time, he's really one-dimensional. Okay. Alistar is another one who's kind of risen to prominence. He's the classic anti-engage champion as well, so he's pretty good specifically against Blitzcrank, but he's also pretty good against Leona or Thresh. And, you know, he benefits very heavily from Aftershock as well. He has several different ways he can proc it, so that does make him really powerful. Alistar's problem, he doesn't have quite as much damage as Leona does early on. Like, his abilities don't do nearly the damage. Like, his W only does 55 damage. His Q only does 60 damage. So he doesn't have nearly the same kind of kill threat early that Leona does. With her abilities, you got to remember the Sunlight proc. That's a lot of damage, all those Sunlight procs. And he doesn't have any steroids that benefit from Aftershock as well, right? So he doesn't have anything that gives him extra armor or magic resets that would scale with Aftershock. And similar to Leona, he has to go all in for his engage, so he can't just sit back and throw a hook like Thresh and just, he's not that versatile. If you're going all in, you're going all in. So he's kind of like a Leona that's just not as strong right now. Like, he's like a Leona that just doesn't do as much damage. You know, one of his strengths in the past had been, well, he can tower dive very early with his ult, but now so can Leona because she gets so much extra armor off of her, you know, her W and Aftershock that it's not really a problem. And his E is delayed, so his third crowd control is really delayed. Whereas Leona, she can chain them all together. She can E plus Q and then R right on top of it and just chain stun somebody for like 3 seconds. And his ult doesn't do any damage anymore. It used to give extra damage on autos, but they removed that. So that's he's okay. He's okay. He has great roams. You know, you can roam to middle. He's a little bit more versatile than Leona in that he can peel by knocking people away a little bit better if you need to go into defensive mode. But he has really long cooldowns as well. I mean, Leona has some pretty long cooldowns too. But remember that she also, her Q is only on a 6-second cooldown now base. And Alistar, both of his are 17 seconds and 14 seconds. So he's just not going to have as much uptime as she does. Also, you're not going to be able to get a lot of cooldown reduction now, and Alistar really needs cooldown reduction because he has very long cooldowns. So, you know, the fact that some of the best builds are this, you know, Ruby Sightstorm and a Locket for tanks does not bode very well for him because all of his abilities have really long cooldowns. So he's just going to be walking around doing nothing a lot of the fight, typically. So Alistar's okay. I thought he'd be a bit stronger than he is, but I think Leona is just Leona and Thresh are just much better right now than Alistar most of the time. But he's okay. He does have extra sustain in lane with his roar, which is nice. But at the same time, second wind plus Targon's shield give you so much sustain in lane anyways that, and the nerf to Aerie give you so much sustain in lane anyways that you really don't need his passive as much as you used to. So, you know, that has historically been one of his strengths, is he was an engaged tank who, yeah, has always done a little bit less damage than Leona and Thresh, but he made up for that because he had the extra sustain in lane. He could make it through tough poke lanes, whereas those other champions would get poked out of lane. But that's just not the case now with the new runes and items. So, he's okay. He's just not as strong as some of the champions that serve a similar role that are rated higher. Sona's still really good. A lot of people might put her higher than this, but, you know, I think I talked about this earlier. I don't remember if it was this video or last video. But no, did I even play her in Season 6? I can't remember. Yeah, I had a 60% win rate in Season 6 with her. It was only 30 games played, so it wasn't a lot. Then Season 7, I had like 181 games with her, 54%. So I'm no stranger to Sona. I know she has really good lane harass, excellent scaling, but this preseason has just been abysmal. Now, it's only 9 games with her so far, but I think the big issue is, number one, she can just get murdered in lane. Like, if Leona ever hooks her, she's done. If Thresh ever hooks her, she's done. Like, if Zyra hits her with a root, she's done. So, she just gets Blitzcrank, Alistar, all of these champions, anything that can hard engage on her is just really, really rough. And then, she's very squishy. So, they took away... she did get some base armor, but you can't get that 72 health anymore. And that was kind of a big deal with her. So now her health is only like 530 or something base. And as we've seen with Leona, Leona can deal like 400 something damage by herself at level 3. So she can do like 80% of Sona's health by herself. And that doesn't even include Ignite. If she ignites, she can probably, with just like a couple of auto attacks from her 80 carry to proc the Sunlight, she can probably kill Sona basically by herself. Now, Sona does scale very well, but they just nerfed Ardent Sensor. And, you know, with the Ingenious build, you really want to be building something like Redemption Locket, which are both really good, but that means that she can't get her Athenes if you build that. And so she kind of has a conflict of interest where she wants to go this Ardent Athenes build, but then Redemption Locket is also really good, and you're just not going to have time to build all of those items. And that's the thing, too, is Sona really starts taking off once she gets 2 or 3 items. Typically 2. Historically, it's been like Ardent plus Athenes and Holy Grail, and you're really strong. So games are ending faster. It's harder to get to those items as fast as you would like. You can't really harass people out in lane anymore, at least not the supports, because a lot of them are going to have Second Wind and really high base health pools, and they're going to have Targon's Brace. So that makes it very difficult to deal with. And she has virtually no response to assassins. So like if a Kha'Zix jumps in her face, or a Rengar, or a Fizz, or a Kassadin, or a Kayn, or just any number of these other like very popular champions, she just rolls over and dies, probably. I mean, she can ult them and try to run away, but it's really hard. So you're kind of forced into getting Ninja Tabi. But there are not a lot of other good defensive things you can get. I mean, you could get like Locket or something. But she just does not itemize very well for like super assassin type of metas. She's just going to be squishy and she's going to get killed a lot. And she doesn't apply enough pressure, especially with this nerf to Ares, going to hurt her a pretty significant amount, her pressure. Because now you're definitely not cracking through second wind plus Targons in lane. At least not that easily. Like maybe for the first like couple of minutes in lane, but after their first back, it's not happening anymore. And they can always kill you at any point in the game. You know, if they ever land anything on you, you're probably dead. So she can be very strong, but she's super risky. She was also hot nerfed recently, where her base attack damage is taken down, her armor is even lower, and then her heal is for significantly less. Yeah, so 5 health off the heal, and then 5 off the shield as well, in addition to the Aerie nerf. So she can win a lot, she can be really strong, but she's very, very risky, much more so than she used to be, because everything above her can, just about everything can one-shot her, pretty much, in a lot of situations. So that's a really tough boat to be in. So she can be good. There are a couple of different builds. I've tried out the Kleptomancy build. I think it's just too cute. I mean, you can go Klepto, Biscuit, Footwear, Celestial, and then Conditioning and Revitalize. This will give you some extra health, 135 extra health. Klepto does help you sustain in lane. Conditioning, or Revitalize rather, does give you some extra healing and shielding. But I just think that it's super dangerous. I think you need Aerie just so you have some kind of harassment early. Aerie also scales later to give you better healing and shielding. You really, really want Mana Flow Band. Extra mana is excellent on her. And then Zombie and Genius is just really good for vision control. Then, you know, like I said, you really have to get Ninja Tabis right now, most of the time. And then I think going like Redemption Locket is probably the way to go. And then Censor Athenes. But it's difficult to say. I think getting that Locket does help you. This will help you out quite a lot with your own defense as well as defense for your allies. So I think that's kind of what you have to do with Sona. So she's good. She has good matchups. Everybody's familiar with her. She's very simple, easy to play, great scaling. You know, if you have a team fight comp, and I just think Rakan's kind of the premier team fighter right now because he has engage. Sona can engage, like she can flash ult, but that's really dicey. I just think that Rakan is just a better version of Sona right now. Like he has better scaling. Maybe not better scaling, like her auras are very good, but he's a lot better in faster fights. And I think most fights are going to be really fast because everybody has so much damage that Sona's not going to have as much time to get off, you know, 3 or 4 W's in a fight like she used to in the last meta. So she's still good. She's still good, but she has a bit more problems than I initially thought. And, you know, I've died with her like literally, almost literally twice as much. Like 6.1 deaths is ridiculous on average. Now it's only 9 games, but, you know, it's only 3.6 deaths here. And then even over here, it was like 4.5. So, you know, she's very dangerous. So she's very powerful, but she's a lot more dangerous than she used to be in this meta. Taric. A lot of people love Taric. Taric is okay. My problem with Taric is against a lot of players, his E is very telegraphed unless you flash on him. And this makes it very hard for him to do anything in lane. He can get harassed out by things like Zyra or Sona, but he can also get second wind, and he has a heal, and he can get Targons. So that does help keep him in the game a little bit. You can run Guardian on Taric. I would still like to do Aftershock because of his E. Those stats are just so good. But maybe Guardian's better. Like 45 seconds on Guardian just sucks. Like if it was 20 seconds, I would love to put Guardian on him. But you know, Taric does scale very well with extra extra armor, and, you know, his shield strength. Obviously, his ult has good applications. He's just, like, probably the best, one of the best team fighter utility supports. Now, if they don't kill somebody, if they don't kill your team, like, immediately, for some reason they don't have a lot of damage, then his ult can just really take over the game. But the problem is there's a lot of damage, right? And so, you know, when a Kha'Zix jumps on your AD carry, and then, you know, Leona engages on him as well, your ult's just going to be too slow. Most people are dead in 2.5 seconds. So it's pretty good, especially if you use it proactively. Like if you know that you have a Maokai or a Sejuani that's about to start a fight and lock people up, you can go ahead and use your ult before people even take damage, and that can be a really powerful application if you use it proactively rather than reactively. But he still does require some team coordination. He has to sit there and just auto-attack people in fights to get his cooldowns lower. Which, granted, with Aftershock and with Second Wind and Targon's Brace and all that stuff, it is a lot easier to do that than it has been in the past. So he's okay. He's okay. So in general, he's very close range and he doesn't have engage. And I would much prefer tanks that have engage right now, who can just engage and end fights quickly to complement all of the damage that's running around. But he's pretty decent. You know, if you want to play a team fighter and you're really scared that you're going to die as Sona, which is a reasonable fear right now, then Taric is kind of similar power. He doesn't have the harass early, but he has similar team contributions and scaling later. Kind of like Rakan, he can build tanky and utility stuff, so he can go Ruby, Locket, Redemption, and be super powerful and effective in fights. He can also use Knight's Vow a lot better than Rakan can. So, you know, those 4 items there, if he can manage to get, you know, especially Redemption and Locket is very, very powerful in team fights with Ruby and Ingenious Hunter. And then if he gets Knight's Vow on top of that, it's going to be pretty tough to lose team fights at that point. That's a lot of items, and remember, you're not going to have enough gold for a lot of those. But, you know, once you complete Ruby Locket, you're going to be rocking pretty hard, and then Redemption on top of that's going to be really strong. So he's good. I mean, he might deserve to be a little bit higher than that, you know, maybe upper tier 2. You could maybe squeeze him in, you know, if you don't think Zyra's that hot right now, you could maybe squeeze him in a tier 1, but just the fact that he doesn't do a lot in lane against a lot of allies. Now, I did have a Taric that just completely rolled over my lane because my AD carry got hit by every single E yesterday, but in general, I feel like that's a bit more rare. And then finally, Janna. I think Janna has been nerfed quite a lot, and she doesn't have a good keystone. Like, she can use Aerie, she can try to be aggressive early, but that's just not her style. That's not who she is. You know, she is a scaling utility support that has excellent peel, and that's just not very good in this meta. Like, it's okay. Like, it's alright with Vayne because Vayne just doesn't do anything early game anyways, and Vayne's very popular right now. So you can go Aerie Vayne, you can go Nullifying Orb to help protect you against some of the damage, and then just go for like Gathering Storm, Absolute Focus, and just farm it out with like coin and lane. And then just build something like Ninja Tabi, Ruby Sightstone, Redemption, Locket, or Ardent Sensor. And she can be really powerful with those things, but the nerf to her shield hurt. She doesn't have a great... It's okay matchup against Leona, but she doesn't smash Leona as much as she used to because of her Tornado Speed nerf. And if Thresh hooks her, or Rakan manages to ult on top of her, or, you know, Leona manages to get through with her E, any of these things happen, and she's probably going to die. Zyra manages to tie her up. It's going to be a rough time. So Janna still can be pretty good, but she's just not nearly as good as she was. That's a Season 7 guide. So she's alright. If you're going to pick her, I would definitely pick with just a scaling AD carry, like maybe a Twitch or a Vayne that can't really do a lot in lane anyways. I mean, she would be like a decent pick into Tahm Kench or maybe Rakan. But yeah, against some of these other ones, maybe Alistar, some of these other ones, it's going to be pretty dangerous to pick her. Okay, tier 3. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because I do want to end this video, you know, oh god, it's an hour 40 minutes. I really want it to be like an hour, but of course it takes forever. But there is just a lot going on here. So now that I have more clarity on like runes and matchups and the meta and stuff like that, I feel like I can share a bit more with you. Soraka could potentially be tier 2. I only put the top 10 champions in tier 2 always, just so you have a good point of reference. Just so you're like, okay, tier 2, always top 10. So I try to keep it, you know, keep it consistent. But, you know, Soraka and Lulu could easily creep in there, probably even Nami. There's a lot of stuff that's really viable right now. The problem with Soraka, once again, she doesn't have a good keystone. Ares okay on her. The healing component's good later on. And she doesn't have a lot of escape, so she just dies to assassins if she gets caught. The new build that I described in the guide is nice. That does help a lot. When you go like Ninja Tabi, Ruby Sightstone, and then eventually you can go Warmogs. But a lot of times you won't get enough gold, and games just won't last long enough to do that. But she is okay. She is powerful. If tanks come back, you know, if people start running more Jarvans and, you know, Ramesses and Urgots and stuff like that, then she's going to be a lot better. So if people actually pick tanks on your team, you know, if you have like a Sedge Urgot on your team, she gets a lot better. But her harassment really doesn't do anything in lane a lot of the time because of Second Wind, because of, you know, Targons. And if she ever gets hooked by any or engaged on by any of those champions, she's probably going to die. Like her silence does help out a little bit. But it's not going to do a lot against a Blitz hook. Or if Leona just, you know, gets on your face. Or like Thresh hooks you. So she's okay. She's okay. She's just not really like, she's more of a slow scaler in lane with like some moderate harassment is kind of her profile. And she can just get camped and murdered by a lot of these high damage junglers. So, you know, she's alright. She can still be powerful. I just feel like the meta is just a little bit too fast for her, and there's just a little bit too much damage to try to heal through for her. I'd rather just be on the engaged damage side right now, rather than on the reactive heal side. And I like being on the reactive heal side. It's not like I have anything against that. You definitely can win games. I mean, Season 7, Janna was my most played, 57% win rate, 600 games. So trust me, I don't have a problem with the reactive heal side. But I just, after playing, you know, for a couple of weeks here, I feel like that's just not the place to be right now. Not the optimal place. You can still win with it, but I just think that the engaged tanks are going to be a bit tougher. And I would just place Sona a bit above her because Sona at least has better harassment early. And she has better sort of team fighting tools and rotation tools with her E. And then Taric, because he's a similar team fighter, but he's also pretty tanky, so he doesn't get picked off by assassins as much. So I still think Soraka is pretty good. She's just a little bit lower than those two right now, I think. And then Lulu, I think, is going to take a massive hit from Aerie. Lulu can be really good, but once again, she's very susceptible to assassins. She can ult herself and like whimsy herself to try to get away, but at the end of the day, she's very slow. She has a low base move speed, low health, very little in terms of defense, and she can just get carved up by a lot of these damaged junglers. So she's okay. People have kind of moved away from the auto attackers as well. Like, you aren't seeing as many Kog'Maws, and that's her favorite person to team up with bot lane because he's also very susceptible to assassins. So she's all right, but I think, once again, the fact that you're going to be facing second wind Targons, bot lane, and Aerie just got nerfed means that it's going to be a harder time for Lulu on this patch. Same deal with Nami. Nami does have a heal, but it's a similar profile to Lulu. She can get picked off. She can get killed. She does have a little bit more peel than Lulu does. She does have good synergy with Vayne. So Nami, because Vayne likes to stick to people, Nami's E is particularly good on her. But, you know, at the end of the day, I feel like it's she still suffers from kind of Lulu-itis, where she just can't harass enough in the bot lane to cut through the Targon's second wind, and then the Aerie nerf. Bard can be good if you win a lot with Bard. More power to you. Go for it. He does do a lot of damage early. His itemization is a little weird. So you can, I think Comet's probably best on him. He did get Aerie, but he does apply a slow and potentially a stun on his Q. So I think Comet's perfectly reasonable to get with him. It does more spike damage, which is kind of what Bard wants to do. You know, he wants to pin somebody and pretty much just kill him on the spot. Mana Flow Band, I still think is good. You can go Ulti Hat if you want. Yes, his shrine or the chimes do give you more mana, but Mana Flow will let you spam Q even more. In lane, Celerity lets you move around, go pick up your chimes faster. Scorch for early game. You can actually go Cheap Shot on him if you want, because his auto attacks do apply a slow. The Cheap Shot's not terrible, but I still think that Zombie Ward and Genius Hunter is kind of the way to go. Then I would just go Ruby, Redemption, Locket. Build pretty standard, really powerful right now with Ingenious plus Ruby. So I think he's pretty good. I mean, he has good roam potential, he has good harassment early, he has good utility with his ultimate later. He's a pretty high skill cap champion that requires quite a bit of coordination on your team. Like, he's a specialist champion. If you want to play Bard, you probably need to one-trick him. You can win a lot of games with him. But for the general population, I think you're just working too hard for, you know, what other champions can give you. Whether it's early game harassment, and you want that, you know, from Zyra, or whether you just want a lot more sort of team utility. And then I would pick something probably like, you know, Bard or Thresh instead. But he can win. He can be pretty strong, for sure, early on. He's unique. He's interesting. Karma's another one. People talk about Karma a lot. They're like, oh my gosh, if you tried ulti hat on Karma. It's okay. The problem with Karma, she doesn't have a lot of crowd control, and she's susceptible to the assassins, just like all the other squishy champs. Now, she can protect herself with a Mantra W to get back a little bit of health, but I just don't think it's that great. And she's a lane harass champion that doesn't have much all-in potential or CC, that also doesn't have a heal for your allies. So I don't think you're going to cut through the second win Targon's tanks. And she's okay. I mean, she has some okay scaling. I just feel like Taric and Sona are just overall going to be better team fighters later on, or probably even Janna, if that's what you're into. And her niche has really always been that she has excellent early game harassment and wave clear, and like okay team fighting later. But I just don't think that's where the meta is right now. I just think that harassment, especially now that Aerie got nerfed, it's just not as strong as it used to be. I feel like all in or crowd control and utility are just going to be better in the meta. Brand is okay. Zyra is just a better version of Brand. She has more consistent harass, similar all-in damage, but he's okay. If you want to play an AP champion, you don't like Zyra, Brand's a decent pickup. Nautilus is all right. I just feel like Thresh, Blitz, and Leona are going to be better. Nautilus's problem, part of it is his auto attacks are so slow, and that's an important part of his kit. There's so many times I'm just sitting there just like waiting on him to swing, and then they like jump out of the way, or they kill the person that I'm trying to peel for. So his auto attacks are just so abysmally slow. And his hook is hard to hit through minions. It's a really fat hook. It also doesn't go through walls. So you can't like hang out in bushes and hook people over walls like you can with Thresh or Blitz. So that's kind of a hit to him as well. He does have a guaranteed point click ult, which is nice, but ultimately, I just feel like those other champions are better. Now I put Shen up this high. I've heard that Shen's really good. I've seen that Shen statistically is good, but it's a low sample size. I haven't tried it myself. I'm not sure what's up with that. He does do a decent amount of damage. I suppose, you know, he does a decent amount of damage, and he has kind of his, you know, auto attack and vulnerability for both him and his ally. But I'd have to try it out. I'm not sure, like, what's up with that. But, you know, obviously he can use Aftershock. He does benefit from the kind of the second win Targon's package. He does decent damage, like, you know, when you hit people with your Q, especially if you get the slow on, like, if you get the empowered Qs, it is a lot of damage. But he only has one piece of CC. I don't know. I'll have to try it out. I mean, it's possible he deserves to be higher. I just haven't tried it. Fiddlesticks is okay. I liked Fiddle a lot in the last meta. I don't like him as much in this one. Aerie just got nerfed. That's what he uses. You can use Comet, but usually you just spam, you know, harass on people with the crows. And the problem, once again, is just lane harass doesn't matter right now because of second wind and Targons. And a lot of AD carries can even take you know, fresh blood if they want to against a harass lane. You know, so if they go something like fresh blood eyeball collector, and then, you know, their tank support has Targons, they're going to heal through most of what you have. And a lot of champions are going to start switching back over to Blade the Ruined King, potentially. You know, champions like Twitch will probably switch back over to that. And they can also start Doran Shield if they want to. So, you know, if a Twitch starts Doran Shield, he takes fresh blood, he has a Leona on his team, who also has Targon's Brace, and his first item is Vamp Scepter. You know, your Crow Harass isn't going to do anything to him. He's just going to get a free pass in lane most of the time. So I think that really hurts Fiddlestick's early game. Obviously, he has a good ultimate. A lot of these tanks are going to be rushing Locket, though, especially once they figure out like the synergy between Ruby Sightstone, Locket, and Ingenious Hunter. A lot of them are going to be rushing Locket, especially against something like Fiddlesticks, and that's going to negate a lot of your damage. So I don't think it's a very good meta for Fiddle. Like, yeah, Fiddle is good against assassins if you fear, you know, Kha'Zix or Kassadin or whatever. I just think you're giving up too much for that at this point. I'd rather just play a crowd control tank. And Misfortune is kind of a pocket pick against Zyra. If people start playing Zyra a lot, people aren't playing Zyra that much right now, though. For the reasons I described, she is really strong, but it's a lot harder for her to harass out some of these tanks because of Second Wind. But if they do pick Zyra, then Misfortune's a pretty good pick into her. Misfortune was using Airy, though, and that just got nerfed, so I don't know. She's okay. She's okay. She's just squishy, prone to getting massacred by assassins, and just doesn't have amazing itemization right now. Then as you go down the list, you can see Morgana, Braum, Teemo. Like, all of these champions can be good. Teemo's good harassment early. Braum is a good team fighter, but he doesn't have very strong engage. You know, I'd rather just play some of these other tanks up here instead of Braum, but he's all right. Morgana, similarly. Morgana has pretty good matchup into Thresh and Leona, but she just doesn't have a good keystone. She doesn't have great itemization right now. She's okay. There's a lot of physical damage out there. You know, her Black Shield's not going to save you from a Kayn or from Kha'Zix or, you know, any of these other AD champions. So that's a major problem. Malzahar's okay. He's not as great at support as he used to be. They nerfed his minion damage, so he just basically sits and looks at people in the laning phase. He could get murdered if he ever gets caught by a tank. He can get harassed out by Zyra. Same is true of Annie. She has a great all-in level 6, but so does Zyra, so does Brand, and they have a lot more of an active laning phase. Vel'Koz can do a lot of damage, but he has to stand still and channel. Problematic against assassins. You probably just want to... And his harass doesn't matter in lane for the reasons I've described. So you probably just want to stick with Zyra there. Trundle's okay. He's good at breaking tanks. He might deserve to be a little bit higher. He doesn't have a great keystone, and he doesn't have great itemization right now. You can pillar directly on top of somebody and proc Aftershock if you want to. It's really clunky. I think there are probably better choices. Zillion's kind of an odd duck. He doesn't have a good keystone, as far as I can see. He's decent. You know, he has some damage in lane. He has some utility. I just think he doesn't quite do enough. But to be fair, I haven't played him a lot. So, you know, the speed up ability is kind of nice, but I don't think engage is really a problem. If you really like engage a lot, you know, and you like that speed up, just play something like, you know, Rakan and run Talisman. Or you could even run Talisman on someone like Thresh, or potentially even Blitzcrank. It'd be kind of awkward on Blitzcrank. But Blitzcrank, who went coin Talisman, may not be that bad. It would give him some extra mana regen. It would let him run up to people. Or, I mean, you could run Righteous Glory on someone like Blitz or Rakan also. I think there are better ways if you want to engage than to go Zillion for his speed up. But he could still be all right. And then so on and so forth all the way down. Okay, well, that's going to be it. I intended this to be a faster video, but as always, there's just too much information. Can't do it fast enough. Be sure to check out my patch notes if you're interested in hearing about that, hearing a little bit more about the meta-analysis and the top 5 for the other roles. And that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.